Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session on how CyberArk is able to secure remote workers. In these strange times, the bad elements of the internet are not sitting back and are instead doubling down on their efforts to compromise organizations, whether big or small. Before I begin, I'd like to just note that the session is being recorded, so you will receive a recording once the session is concluded. All attendees have been muted, but there may be some time for questions at the end, so please feel free to use the chat and send your questions to the panelists. My name is Duncan Kia, and I'm a member of the Ottawa-based team that works with the federal and provincial governments. I'm joined today by my colleague Pam Turin, who is the team lead also out of Ottawa. For those that don't know, CyberArk has been in existence for 21 years. We are publicly traded on the NASDAQ with around 250 customers in Canada, supported by a team of around 30 employees, most of whom reside in Canada. So we're known for our PAM solution, but today's session is not about privileged access management. So if this is the reason you joined for this session, I encourage you to get in touch with us either directly or through the Capitol Hill Group. Alternatively, you may also read one of our industry analyst reports from Gartner, Forrester, or Cupping a Call. So Cupping a Call specifically released a new PAM leadership last week, so it's hot off the press if that's something that you're interested in. PAM is of course very important, but the focus of today's brief session is on the use cases we all find ourselves in today as remote workers. So for those in the audience interested in procurement, we have existing vehicles in place, including SOLSIS, vendor of record for the Government of Ontario, and we're also the selected vendor for PAM standardization by Shared Services Canada under the AACS project. So in today's session, I hope to address some questions, such as why is these privilege even more important now than it was before? How can we take a proactive approach to managing privilege? How are organizations solving remote access currently, and how can we do it better? So first, let's cover where we are and how we got here. So in Canada, we were keeping an eye on things globally and starting to contemplate our own measures to implement when all of a sudden we all got sent home. So this understandably caught the security and operations teams completely off guard, and now they had to scramble and provide a safe way for workers to work from home. And this started with providing a means to connect from the outside, which is typically done with a VPN. Unfortunately, even if the particular organization did already have VPN capabilities, there were most likely not enough licenses to accommodate the entire staff contingent. Following from that, the VPN infrastructure had also not been designed to accommodate the additional load they would now be receiving. Provisioning users into the VPN infrastructure was also a challenge. Most workers who were not previously permitted VPN access now had to have it, and if not accustomed to the technology, user training may also have been required. So all of these issues, along with the typical ones like incorrectly configured VPN gateways, were all problems being faced. Meanwhile, the hacker groups were watching, and they too were rapidly coming up with ways to capitalize on the events taking place. So popular internet security services company Shodan reported that the number of open remote desktop ports increased by 41% during this period. And this is only the number of detected open remote desktop ports using the standard port 3389. So this tells me two things. Operations teams at those organizations were so desperate that they didn't even wait for VPN configuration or licenses to come, if they were even coming. And second, they did not even secure remote desktop over SSL. So for the most part, the initial VPN scramble has settled, but now we have the second wave of COVID-19 fallout, which I'll refer to as the ransomware noisy neighbor. And that's because this one isn't going away. So, we're all even more exposed. Before the new norm came along, we would have been at the office sitting behind corporate firewalls and other fancy security equipment. But today we find ourselves at home with a cheap ISP router fulfilling the same role. We have our home network devices sharing the LAN, perhaps we even use some of those devices to work on, both of which can lead to exposure. Meanwhile, TrickBot and Emotet and other examples of malware have been rebundling and rebranding themselves to take advantage of the COVID-19 threats and have been reusing various lures that they've used in the past. TrustWave has reported that COVID-19 business email compromise scams are on the increase, and the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre indicated that attackers are targeting remote access and home user entry points. But as mentioned, this is an old problem and one that we don't seem to be learning from. For example, in the last couple of months, we have seen many examples of ransomware victims, such those from cities and municipalities. But we also have had a major Canadian military contractor that's been victim to ransomware. We've had Canadian accounting firm NMP that's been compromised. We also have the government of Nunavut, amongst many others. So we'll park the VPN discussion for a bit and turn our attention first to the endpoint, or if you prefer, the laptops and desktops we've all been authorized to take home. And believe it or not, companies have even been sending desktops and other similar devices home with their users to try and assist them with working from home. So the number one place that we need to focus now more than ever is the endpoint. Privileged accounts can be found all over the endpoint, and that's where most of the attacks begin. And that's because workstations are everywhere. Due to their mobility and connectivity, they are the easiest link in the chain. So by starting with the endpoint, we can potentially stop the attack chain from where it starts. And no one can ignore the endpoint. To illustrate why, let's have a look at how the vast majority of breaches occur. So the point of entry is usually a workstation, most likely by a user clicking on a phishing email, plugging in an affected device, or accessing a bad file on the internet. Perhaps the attacker already has persistence in the home network by having compromised family devices previously, and then leverages these compromised devices to target the new work device that's on the network. Internet of Things comes to mind. Much like our routers, IoT devices are notoriously weak in the security area. From there, the attacker will try and find a privileged account, whether the user's own account or a privileged account saved on their machine, either as a hash or a saved password. And once obtained, everything else is possible. Stealing or encrypting sensitive data, denial of service, or ransomware. With a VPN session in progress, the attacker also has the potential to pivot into the corporate network and do further damage. Because ultimately, this is what they're instead of just the workstation. So to understand how this is possible, it really starts with what an admin user is able to do. A survey conducted by CyberArk concluded that 87% of organizations have not removed local administrator from their workstations. And as an admin, I can change system configurations, such as install or start services, or disable or uninstall antivirus. I could potentially install malware, either intentionally or unintentionally. 90 to 95% of malware requires local admin privileges in order to gain persistence. And with that, things like kernel mode rootkits or system level keyloggers could be installed. I could also access and change accounts. I could create myself a backdoor account, modify existing user accounts, and even reset local user passwords. Some thoughts from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, who frequently revise and release their top 10 security actions for securing Canadians, include 3 items specifically related to the endpoint. Keep everything patched, enforce management of administrative privileges, and implement application whitelisting. More relevant to ransomware, however, they also have specific guidance for prevention and recovery from ransomware-based attacks, included in which is enforcement of least privilege. Management of the endpoint can mean many things, and the techniques can be categorized on the highest level as proactive, which provide controls to prevent things from happening, and reactive, which monitor and react to things happening. There are likely many products running on endpoints today, and I'm sure if I polled the folks on this call, we would hear all sorts of endpoint protection suites like antivirus, encryption, firewalls, to perhaps some of our industry's latest attempts of stopping the bad guys in the form of EDR, next generation antivirus, and such solutions that leverage behavioral analytics. You're most likely already patching Windows and various applications and frameworks like your Adobe, Java, and browsers such as Chrome and Firefox with your configuration management tools. But there's a fundamental building block missing. And that missing block is securing privilege. And this is where CyberArk's Endpoint Privilege Manager comes in. Essentially an enabler to allow information security and desktop operations teams to do what they know is right and have always wanted to do, harden the endpoint without impacting users. More about EPM in a second, but specifically on its ransomware capabilities. CyberArk Research Labs test all known and new ransomware against the EPM product. And based on their research, they found that the combination of least privilege and application control are 100% effective against ransomware. And this is ultimately because without the necessary privileges or the policy to execute the malicious files, the ransomware is unable to do the job it's there to do. Privilege enforcement. EPM has a policy-based management capability that can be easily configured. One of the biggest blockers in terms of least privilege is that it's an administrative burden configuring all of these policies, which typically has to be done through Active Directory. And ultimately, this is where the vast majority of least privilege projects fail. For application control, we not only have whitelisting to permit allowed applications, but we also have blacklisting for known bad applications, as well as gray listing policies for everything in between. So an example of a gray listed application is a new application that hasn't been seen before. So we can have specific policies for these kinds of applications to potentially block the access to some of the OS level things, which could lead to further compromise. Or in addition, we can also block that application from reaching out across the network. So in the event that someone legitimately needs privilege access, we can also provide workflows for just-in-time user elevation to higher levels of privilege. To take it further from least privilege, we also want the ability to detect any potential exposure through credential theft. Most modern browsers have the functionality to save passwords, but these passwords are saved in the current user context. So even in a least privilege model, a privileged user may not be required to access those passwords. So other than browsers, we also have the capability in most other client-based software, such as FTP clients, remote access clients, VPN clients, and quite importantly, the built-in Windows credential stores such as LSAS or SAM. Credential theft blocking is essentially monitoring for the techniques used to steal these credentials, as opposed to looking out for the tools that are out there that can do it. Those are more your reactive controls that something like an antivirus would be looking out for. Our latest addition to the product is privilege deception, which places lures within the environment to provide early warning of compromise. So if someone was attempting to use one of these lures, which is essentially a fake account, we'd be getting alerts and sending these to the security operations team for scrutiny. And obviously, it's useful for them to have so that they can see if anyone's poking around within the network. So the main features of CyberArk's privilege management product are privilege management, credential theft protection, and application control. These things, as well as all the other features you see on the slide, including just-in-time access and elevation, privilege deception, and ransomware protection, are all included in the product and help ensure that privilege is effectively managed on the endpoint. So moving on and changing gears a bit to our remote access problem. And at this point, it's important for me to mention that our remote access solution is an extension of our privilege access management solution. So it's only applicable really to customers or organizations that are currently going through the procurement process. But for everyone else, it's still interesting information nonetheless. So while COVID-19 continues to be top of mind for most organizations, the risks from remote access to critical systems has always been a pain point for many organizations. Organizations have relied on remote work for employees for any number of reasons, such as money saved on office space, time and cost saved on travel, flexible and rolling working hours, and even improving morale due to a more flexible lifestyle. A survey conducted in 2019 by Owl Labs found that 56% of global companies allow remote work. This number has obviously grown dramatically since then. Gartner has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal as saying that 74% of businesses plan to keep employees home even after the pandemic. Now, I've already mentioned how a VPN can be compromised through a remote worker, but whether or not you have secured the endpoint, we also need to provide the remote worker a means to connect into the infrastructure that they manage securely. Traditionally, this is done through VPN. But the problem with a VPN, other than the burden on provisioning the user, is that it typically gives the user access to the entire corporate network, which in many cases, in fact most cases, is not required. And the problem, of course, then is they become a target for a threat actor, which if they are able to compromise that remote worker, they can potentially leverage the VPN through to the corporate network as well. How do we get remote workers to where they need to be? Today's solutions require an endpoint agent for connectivity. They need passwords to be shared for access. There's very complicated provisioning on a corporate network, and this is especially true for third parties. And it can also be a challenge to use. The ideal solution is to use zero trust concepts, which don't require a VPN and therefore no agent, no passwords, just-in-time provisioning, and a cloud service to facilitate it all. So once again, this solution is an extension of our core privilege access security solution, and it utilizes an existing implementation of the solution. So a typical privilege access security implementation would have your credential vault, which is storing all of your credentials and audit information. It has your session managers to broker the sessions into your infrastructure. It, of course, has the user interface, and then it has password rotators as well. So for remote access, we recently introduced CyberArk ALERO, which is a cloud-based remote access service designed with zero trust in mind. The ALERO connector is easily deployed as a Docker container, which is used to open a secure tunnel to the cloud ALERO service. The remote worker will then be sent an invite to use the accounts they are authorized to use on only the authorized infrastructure that they have been given access to. So basically, it won't give them access to the entire corporate network on the back end. When the remote worker registers through their ALERO mobile application, they register and sign up with biometric authentication using the smartphone's biometric capabilities. And from there, all the user needs to do is authenticate to the ALERO service, where they can view the invitations that either their organization or if they're a third party, the companies that they are working with have provided them. And when ready, they just access the corporate network through the ALERO secure tunnel. So ALERO is a secure method for providing privileged access to both internal users and third parties. No need for passwords, VPNs, token-based multi-factor authentication, or any other external solution to connect to your PAM tool. It can also be quickly deployed to scale any number of remote workers. So in the event of something unforeseen, or if an organization is hiring more employees to work remotely, they're able to quickly scale horizontally to accommodate the additional users. So to end off, some takeaways. First, we want to improve overall security, both during the new norm and beyond. These issues will be with us long after we have beaten COVID-19. CyberArk's global experience with post-breach remediation and privilege management has given us the know-how to deliver these capabilities fast. If you are an existing CyberArk customer, all our non-PaaS products, including EPM, integrate with your current investment. And finally, both EPM and ALERO are easy to use and administer. So I didn't have time to cover the solutions in their entirety, but please feel free to reach out to us either directly or the Capital Hill Group for more information. I'll now open up for Q&A.
Duncan, can you hear me?
Hi, Pam.
Hi. We did get private chat questions. With malware attacks on the rise, are you able to detect and block credential theft attempts on your endpoints and servers?
So that's a great question. One thing I didn't mention was that the EPM product is for any Windows or Mac device, so that of course includes both servers and workstations. But to answer your question, yes, the credential theft works both on workstations and servers.
Thank you. We've got another question through the private chat. Does ALERO have the ability to integrate with ServiceNow or SailPoint?
So as a new product, we ultimately build our products with an API first mindset. So when designing ALERO, we included APIs for your common workflows that adjacent technologies might require, such as ITSM and IAM solutions, which typically need things like sending of invitations for provisioning as well as revoking of access.
Thank you. A business question just came through the private chat. The AACS project. So I can take this one. CyberArk already has a procurement vehicle in place with Shared Services Canada. Another question through the private chat. How much visibility and control do you have over remote users and endpoints?
So the EPM product is an agent-based solution. It ultimately needs to be agent-based so that even if the device is off the corporate network, it's still able to enforce policy. But to do its job, it's also gathering information such as the applications that are running on the endpoint. It's monitoring for credential theft. And we're also able to see things like the local groups and users, system resources, etc., on those endpoints. So all of this information is used in order for the security team or the desktop team to build policies to obviously enforce these privilege and allow the users to make use of the applications that they are allowed to use.
Thank you. We've got another question through the private chat. What if a user does not have a smartphone?
So currently, the method used to authenticate users into the ALERO service is making use of a smartphone's biometric capabilities. But we are also working on and have almost made ready the possibility for SMS-based authentication as well, for two-factor authentication.
We've got about 5 minutes left. Anybody else would like to ask Duncan more questions through the chat, please feel free. Another question through the private chat. Do you know what applications and tasks are running on your endpoints and who has access to them or needs access to them?
Yes, so similarly to the previous question, the agent is able to scan the endpoint and basically see what's running there. It's able to determine which of those applications require privilege. In terms of whether that application should be approved or not, that's ultimately a security decision. In some cases, applications may need privilege, and in that case, an appropriate policy can be defined for it. In other cases, perhaps that application has been infected with something and is reaching out and touching things that it shouldn't be, like, for instance, the SAM repository or LSAS in Windows. And these are obviously cases where that's very, very strange, and we shouldn't really be seeing those sorts of things. So those are the kinds of things that the agent is looking out for. And for those sorts of situations, the usual action is to, by default, block the access of those system repositories. But of course, we also need to know that it's happened. So on the console, we'd see that sort of event happening and obviously be able to make a decision. Perhaps that application does need that sort of capability, but if not, it's a potentially exposed application, and we can obviously look into it going forward.
Got another question. Software developers are constantly requesting local admin access in order to create, run, test their in-house applications. How does this solution address the need for constant open access?
So developers do present a very unique situation in that the tools that they use generate new files. They touch a lot of system files. So we do have specific policies and rules in place that are relevant to those kinds of users, and we have specific policies that that we would apply to the likes of developers. However, that doesn't mean that they need local administrators. So we've worked with a lot of software developers who have obviously had similar arguments with their developers, but in many cases we've been able to work with those developers and make sure that they are able to do their job running without local administrator. So I think it's almost at the half hour, so I think we will leave it there. If we have missed some questions, or if you have if you think of any additional questions at a later stage, again, please feel free to reach out to us either directly or through the Capitol Hill group. Thank you very much.